There's a great movie that's coming out digitally on the 9th. It is called Return to Hardwick, and we are joined by the filmmaker Michael Sellers, and it is about the 93rd Bomb Group, and which of course flew so many missions over Europe and into Germany in broad daylight. Michael, welcome to the show, and I've been to Duxford to the Imperial War Museum, and the baseball ground at Derby County, but you don't really hear much about Hardwick. So was the genesis behind this film?
Pretty much. First of all, thanks for having me on. I'm a former military brat myself, so I can appreciate the Air Force networks giving us TV when I was little. So my grandfather was in the 93rd Bomb Group, and I followed him around on reunions for a long time. And, that's the 93rd Bomb Group, so that's what we made a film about. The group had a lot of films and photos, and I'm in the film and television industry, so it was kind of a perfect match to get this film made.
Oh, it's an amazing story. This is Jan Wall. I'm a film critic and film historian, and this is an amazing idea. What surprised you about their experience the most? What was the big takeaway for you?
Well, I think the big takeaway, just as an overall global thing, is that I'm actually standing here. I mean, my grandfather survived 35 missions over Europe as a bombardier navigator. So for him to come back and then have his family, it's sort of mind-blowing to be able to realize that. So all my efforts on this were volunteer. They raised their own money through grassroots efforts. We didn't do any crazy indie filmmaking money raising. We did it all internally with the veterans and the families. So that makes it really special. And I really did it for my grandfather, if you really want to know. He has since passed away, and he has not ever seen the film. But getting it out to everybody, I think, is the point.
I remember speaking to a couple of veterans who flew Flying Fortresses over Germany. One was shot down and spent time in a Stalag. Another one just told me, hey, it's simple. If the flak hits your plane, you're dead. And if it doesn't, then you live. I mean, it's just amazing the kind of gallows humor that they would have, that they would send hundreds and hundreds of bombers over in these sorties, and they'd come back with half their planes. It was absolute carnage up there.
Oh, my gosh. I mean, one of the second to last missions my grandfather talked about was one of those missions where he got shot up pretty bad, a lot of flak. All his crew came back, and some were hurt. He actually saw all this red stuff all over his body with a really big hit that happened at one point during the mission, and realized that it was hydraulic fluid. It was not blood. So, a lot of those situations happen to where they are happy that they just kind of come back and actually land on the ground.
Oh, it's the bravery, the real freak out, but courage that it takes to do that kind of thing.
It's amazing.
It's amazing. You are a filmmaker yourself, and what movies? I don't mean to trivialize at all the documentary and the experience of your grandfather, but are there any movies that capture this movies about the war and about people who've done this?
Well, I got to say, and I've always used this as a good example, as The War by Ken Burns, his documentary series. In fact, I've taken a lot of cues from Ken, and I hope Ken's okay with that. But his idea of really diving into those personal stories is really important, because then you start relating to that. And I tried to do that in the film, because not only do we tell the history of the 93rd Bomb Group, and that could represent other bomb groups during that time, but it also goes back to the second and third generation and follows this trip that they take back to their airbase, the airbase today. So then I dive into their stories and what their family connection is to that base. So, I got to thank that documentary series for really opening my eye to make that connection to the viewer when they sit down and watch that, because you could just blow a lot of stuff up. But when you put that human element in, it really attracts people.
Couple more questions from Michael Sellers, the filmmaker behind Return to Hardwick, available digital on June 9th. I think about all the different positions on the 17 and the 24, and the one that always fascinated me was the ball turret guy underneath. And I remember my dad telling me, who was a kid in World War II, that was an absolute death trap to be down there, and you had 250 cals right next to your ears. It's amazing to me that a guy would crawl into the ball turret.
Yes. There's a really great organization called the Collings Foundation that travels. Currently, their B-24 is a witchcraft. Their B-17 did crash last year. It was very tragic. But they do have a ball turret on that, and you can get in that airplane and see that. Yeah, it's pretty crazy to think about that somebody got in there for pretty much the entire mission. I mean, you have to imagine that, a mission could last up to 8 hours, 10 hours, and at some point you get in and sit in there and you're looking for enemy fighters. Sometimes if you had problems with the landing, that was a very sad story. You can do a lot of research on that and find out they have to land the plane without landing gear. So the ball turret is part of that, and that person dies if he's trapped in there. So, just let alone getting in that plane and going to all those positions, but then thinking about this guy getting in his ball turret is insane.
It's just amazing. What quality does it take? I mean, what Rick was saying about the ball turrets and you were saying about the personal story. I'm just wondering, your grandfather, who is, looking down and knowing you did this, what quality did he have that made him able to do it? What quality do any of these guys have?
Well, you have to kind of go back to that time because, the war was happening all around us as far as us being in the United States. But when Pearl Harbor happens, it's known to everybody that sort of jumped us into gear. And it jumped a lot of people like my grandfather into gear. He was at the right age. It was what his other friends were doing. And it was sort of a rite of passage to be able to go and enlist and be a part of this. The other thing that he always told me is when he was finally over there and doing his missions, he said it was a job. They looked at it as they got up, they went and did their job. And one of the cliche things is to come back and call these guys heroes when they came back after the war. And even today when you go to reunions and still see veterans there and you call them a hero, they particularly don't like that. It's one of those things where they basically say, I'm not the hero. It's the people that didn't come back that are the heroes. So, he has to put it in this really perspective that when I talked to him when he was alive, in that sort of context, and it really is mind-blowing at some point.
It's amazing to me, too, and we were talking about World War II, and, of course, the saying, war is hell. This was the first war where there was just wholesale bombing like this. And the mission, whether it was, Schweinfurt or Bremen or Dusseldorf, you're trying to blow up a ball-bearing factory or an oil field, but there was so much collateral damage as well. Yeah. And that was another thing that these pilots and bombardiers and gunners had to deal with, wasn't it?
Yes, that's true. And again, my grandfather was a bombardier/navigator who dual rated, went to do two different classes for those positions. I found out, and my grandmother told me on the side, he really didn't like to be known as a bombardier, even through the 70s and 80s and 90s, that he would go to these reunions and talk about stuff. And it's because of that fact. There was something that they could not control. Back then, they did it as best as they could with strategic bombing. They had the Norton bomb site. They could try to get near to where the map said to go and to drop their bombs, but damage did happen. And war is war. I guess you could just kind of check it off as that. But as the years got on, and obviously we're 75 plus, it's one of those things where I do put that on his title. I do put it in when I write his name in places because I think he did earn that. And you have to look at it at a perspective of basically we were trying to save the world, if you really want to put it that way.
Yep. Has anyone brought up the fact that your grandfather, John Sullivan, you bear a pretty striking resemblance to him?
Yeah, I do go to my mother's side. My mom is his daughter. So, and my brother actually goes to my father's side of the family. So, yes, I actually put those photos up on the internet just recently on our webpage, and I'm like, whoa, yep, there it is. I did see that.
Well, listen, we think it's going to be a big hit, and I want to remind everyone that it's going to be available digitally on June 6th, and people will say, well, what does that mean digitally? That means whatever cable or satellite dish network, or any online, iTunes, Amazon, Vudu, Google Play, YouTube, Vimeo, all of that, you can get it, and it has won so many awards at so many film festivals. Return to Hardwick, home of the 93rd Bomb Group, and we've been speaking to Michael Sellers, and this has been a labor of love. Michael, congratulations on it, and can't wait to check it out.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, thank you very much. HardwickFilm.com.